everybody. Welcome to Evolve, where we focus on the evolution of leadership. And I'm Kim Ford, your host. And today I have a very special guest. Ian, could you please introduce yourself and your company?
Hi, Kim. Thanks for having me. Ian Ziskin here. I'm the president of EXec EXcel Group, which is a coaching and consulting firm that I founded about 12 years ago. Do a lot of coaching of senior level leaders and quite a bit of leadership development work, and also have a high interest in the subject of leading change, which is what led me to help put this book together that I know we're going to be talking about as part of our conversation. But prior to that, I spent about 28 years working in large companies, primarily in human resources. And toward the latter part of my corporate career, I was the chief human resources officer for two separate companies. So I have a little bit of a blend of the corporate perspective, I guess, and also the entrepreneurial bent as well. It's great to be with you today.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's talk about why did you write the book, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change?
Yeah, so this book, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change, as you said, as the title would suggest, is really focused on this whole notion of what leaders can do around transformational change. It kind of started a little over a year ago, frankly, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, observing what was going on in society and with individuals and inside of organizations who were dealing not only with COVID and its ramifications, but also economic impact and uncertainty, and people wrestling with remote work, and families with kids wrestling with remote school, and political divisions that seem to be emerging also as a result of all of this. And got me thinking about what it takes for people to survive or maybe thrive in some cases in periods of large-scale transformational change. So that was really impetus number one. And then impetus number two was I lead a consortium of independent coaches and consultants, many of whom have high interest in this topic of leading transformational change. And when it's really a chance to pull together a wide variety of perspectives, a lot of different voices into a book focused on the topic, but not do so in a way that was only Ian's perspective on the world, I thought it would be more valuable and interesting if we had a blend of those perspectives. So now I'm kind of fond of calling it 200 voices in under 200 pages, because we got a lot of different perspectives in the book, but tried to keep it practical and short, because they tell me most people don't read books anymore. So we're trying to make it digestible.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, in the book, you mentioned from what to what. Tell me about that.
Yeah, in my personal experience, this is Ian's view, probably the single most important question anyone can ask, whether it's at the individual level, the team level, the organizational level, or maybe even the societal level, is where are we coming from and what are we moving toward? Most transformational change efforts, big change efforts, oftentimes, in my experience, seem to skip directly to where are we heading, with a lot of confusion and chaos around that, but without a lot of thought to what do we need to preserve that got us here to the place we are in the first place. What do we need to be careful not to mess up in the spirit of trying to introduce new changes, because where we came from and that past capability and perspective turns out to be equally important to where we're heading next. And that's why I think it's the most important question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you also list 7 different competing priorities or paradoxes that have to be mastered. Can you give us an idea of some of those, kind of, and why?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples, and we can go deeper if you decide that you want to do that. But in the book, I talk about this as the beauty of and, if you will. I think leading transformational change in many ways is a lot about handling competing priorities and mastering paradox. And what you end up finding is it's really not so much about either or. Many things have to do with how do you blend something and something else. So a couple of examples of this that really stood out for me. One has to do with the importance of facts and feelings. So here's what I mean by that. Most change efforts in one way or another rely on a set of facts as to what the impetus for change and doing something differently or better might be. Now, interestingly enough, when you're dealing with people, we have this enormous capacity to dismiss or deflect or ignore or explain away the facts that don't necessarily reinforce, our preferred view of the world. And I think the scientific term for that is human nature, because we're all pretty good at it. But at the same time, what you recognize is because humans are involved in making these decisions, a lot of it has to do with what comes from the heart and what comes from the head. Best analogy I can offer, we talk a little bit about in the book, is people's desire to lose weight. They go on the scale, they look at the number, it's irrefutable data.
Yeah.
They may be motivated or they may not be motivated to do the diet and exercise that we all know is required if you want to lose 10 pounds. So getting on the scale is not enough. Having the data staring you in the face is not enough. You also have to be motivated from the inside to make changes. And I think every transformational change I've ever seen or been part of or we wrote about in this book can be explained in that simple way. I think a second example of this idea of reconciling competing priorities or the beauty of and would be speed and rhythm. So a lot of transformational change efforts talk about the importance of doing things faster and picking up the pace. I would agree. I think generally our experience is that people have a tendency to wait too long to make the big difficult changes that they need to make. Most people, when you talk to them in retrospect, rarely will they say, I regret we moved too fast. Typically they will say, we moved too slowly and that was a mistake. However, it's not all about speed. The other aspect of this, particularly when you're talking about bringing a lot of other people along with you on the journey, is what I like to describe as rhythm. There's a certain pace to things that people need to follow along with and be part of, typically because most leaders will tell you things are moving too slowly, and most victims or recipients of change tend to feel like it's moving too fast. And both are probably right from their individual perspectives. But I play a little bit of guitar. I like to use the analogy of music and musicians. Rarely will a musician tell you that playing a song faster and getting to the end quicker makes the song better. Typically what they're going to say is we have to move in a certain rhythm. Everybody's on the same sheet of music. We're playing in harmony because, music without rhythm is noise, and music with rhythm, obviously can be beautiful and harmonious. So we're looking for both. We're looking for speed and rhythm. Those are a couple of examples of the paradoxes, I think, that need to be reconciled.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when I think of the workplace environment and I think of all the changes that have occurred during COVID and how, we have a lot of, distributed workforces and hybrid type of workforces now. I think that rhythm and harmony has drastically changed, right? I think there's a lot of now completely different rhythms, a lot of out of sync, 100%. And my daughter's a guitarist as well, my oldest daughter, and I hear you. I mean, she was, had this big competition and she had to play this classical piece, and if you sped it up, it didn't work. It didn't work at all.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, it actually had to be played at the perfect pace to pull off that piece. And so when you think of that, think of how complex now our workplaces have become because of this out of rhythm, right? You're out of rhythm because you're not sitting next to each other necessarily. It's, we're communicating like we are right now through a computer that, has sometimes a slight delay or, something unique to it. So it is hard to get a rhythm. Like any concepts, I mean, you've been in HR, like talk to me about like, how do you make that work? Do you have any advice for people now in the workforce that are trying to figure out how to make music, right?
Yes, yes. This is a huge challenge right now. You're expressing it really well, and I'm experiencing very much the same thing. And the clients and the people that I work with. A couple of things that seem obvious to me, but they're really hard, right? So first of all, what a lot of people will say is, in situations like we're in, uncertainty, but also lack of human connection, you want to over communicate, right? So communicate, make sure that you're interacting with people on a more regular basis, which I totally sign up for, except for one important factor, which is when most people think about communicating, they're spending most of their energy thinking about telling. I need to tell you more about what you need to do and what's going on and what the goals of the organization are and what we're trying to accomplish. All of those things are important. But what's even more important that gets ignored a lot is listening, making sure that you understand where other people are coming from and what are the issues that they're dealing with and what are the problems, not only at work, but in their personal and home lives that they're working their way through. That's where the chemistry really comes from. I think as much or more from the listening. And then the corollary to listening is something that you hear a lot of people talking about over the last couple of years, at least in a much higher degree, and that is empathy. Trying to understand as a leader or a person the place that the other person is coming from and the problems and issues and obstacles that they're trying to overcome, and how that has an impact on their ability not only to produce at work, but mental health and a high degree of engagement and people feeling like they're part of something bigger than themselves. All of those things cannot happen nearly as well if empathy is absent. And I've learned a lot about that, just myself, from my own way of interacting with people, making sure or trying to make sure that I understand better where they're coming from. And in order to do that, you have to listen a lot more than you probably would ordinarily think you should.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about some of the common themes in your book? You talked about a lot of different perspectives. Were there common themes that resonated from all those people when you combine them together?
Yes. There are a number of common themes. One of the ways I would describe it that we talk about in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the book is this idea of, not surprisingly, there really is a secret sauce for leading transformational change. So you have all of these contributors who wrote essays, all from their own individual angles. We have a lot of interviews that were conducted with senior level leaders who themselves, have many experiences driving transformational change. We have, well over 150 people contributing to a survey about their experience as a leader of change or as a victim of change. And so there's, 10 themes, if you will, in the secret sauce. I know we don't have time to go through all of them today, but let me offer a few. Just kind of give you a perspective of some things that really came through consistently. One being this idea of start with truth, talent, and timing, right? And so the combination of those things. What do I mean by that? Truth is really all about define reality. Situation is what it is. We are where we are. We might prefer a different set of circumstances than we're in. And people do tend to waste a lot of energy denying the data, like we were talking about earlier, or explaining away things that are happening around them.
Right.
With great conviction. The only problem is the more time and energy you spend on that, the more time you waste in addressing the problem that's actually still there, staring you in the face. So truth matters a lot. The talent element is surround yourself with people who can actually make change happen, because you're not going to do it by yourself, no matter how good or smart or capable you may be. And timing, we alluded to this a little bit earlier as well. Generally speaking, in order for transformational change to take hold, you have to move faster than feels comfortable to you.
Yeah.
And it's really all about, picking up the pace and not dwelling on things that you really can't control. Another element of the secret sauce that really jumped out pretty vividly in my experience was this idea of go first but not alone, right? So as I was saying, leading transformational change is really all about leaders, doing some things they need to do, but you're not going to get there by yourself. And it turns out one of the big ahas for me in the book was understanding that while having leaders who can lead transformational change is important, what's even more important is the idea of leadership, meaning that no matter where you sit in the organization and no matter what your job title says, you can actually be part of the transformation of the organization based on what you or I do, rather than waiting around for somebody else to tell you about that, right? I think another element of this secret sauce that turned out to be, from my perspective, really valuable was the idea of love influencers and resistors. We spend a lot of time when we're leading change looking for people who are like-minded, believe in what we're doing, are supportive of what we're doing, and want to be part of the change. And they can have a very heavy influence on everybody else around them, especially if they're highly regarded and highly respected. They don't have to be in leadership roles to do that. However, there's also a very strong tendency to dismiss people who ask hard questions or seem to be in some way skeptical. And I think you have to love those people too, because if you dismiss them too quickly, you'll kind of miss out on the difficult things that they're asking about that probably need to be addressed too. Not just the things that are easy to do or that everybody agrees need to be done, which is why we describe it as love influencers and love resistors as well.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying too is to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And quite frankly, I think, at least in my lifetime, any time, change is good. But time kills lots of things, right? So you do have to move quickly. You have to adapt. You have to be okay with it. And a lot of people are just so afraid of change. I mean, I've run into it, whether it's in my family, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues, clients of ours. And I think it can be a good thing. And I think especially, with the pandemic and, hopefully we're on the other side of that. I think a lot of companies are experiencing change that they never anticipated, and they're being forced into it. And so I think it's one of these times in life where you actually have to just grab it and accept it and move forward, or you're going to be left behind.
Yes, and just to build on what you were saying, the risk of not taking action is often higher than the risk of taking action, right? So to your point about fear, one of the other things I think I've learned personally about putting the book together, there's always this debate when you're talking about change of, do people actually hate change or not? Right? And
I love change personally. So
yeah, I'm a somebody who's more change driven maybe than the average person. But the conclusion that I came to on average, from putting the book together, was on average, people do hate change. However, they actually hate failure more. So
then you give them a choice, failure or change.
Right. I mean, literally, you're kind of appealing to, fear is real.
Yeah.
resistance to change is real. The hatred of change, I think, is real. It needs to be accounted for. One of the ways to account for all of that is most people hate failure and don't want to be part of an organization or a team that's failing. And so if you can draw a more connected line between the difficult actions we're about to take to change and improve things and minimize the risk of us failing at the end, because if we do nothing, the risk is actually fairly high of us failing at the end, then I think you have a fighting chance of bringing people along with you.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what are some important steps leaders should take?
Well, one of the steps we haven't talked about yet in this conversation is while there's a huge amount of importance on a vision, what is it we're trying to achieve? You know, in the book, I call it define, align, and refine the what and why. You know, organizations put a lot of energy on the what and the why and painting this, you know, vision or picture of what we're trying to achieve long term. It's extremely important. But the step that often gets overlooked because it's not as sexy, frankly, is the execution piece, right? You know, what are the steps we're going to take to keep us on track, to minimize the risk of being distracted by shiny objects, by figuring out, you know, what needs to be done first, second, and third, because, you know, to paraphrase Thomas Edison, there's a fine line between vision and hallucination. And so a lot of organizations put the energy into the vision, but much less energy into the execution. That's a step that gets skipped over, and it's done with great peril, I would say.
Yeah, no, very, very true. And talk about a takeaway. If leaders could take away something, if people could take away something from your book, what would you want them to be that takeaway?
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about at the beginning and then at the end of the book is, you know, what does pizza have to do with leading transformational change? You know, it's gotten a lot of people's attention. So it's kind of a pizza analogy, if you will, that, you know, the way I tend to think about it. And here's why I bring it up. You know, you go back in history, pizza 997 AD in Gaeta, Italy. That's when it was thought to be invented. It's been a lot of years, you know, since pizza first came on the scene, and in many people's minds, you know, fairly traditional. However, if you look at shapes and sizes and toppings and cheeses and crusts and preparations and the outlets, the places you can find pizza, and the various secret sauces that go into it, it's been a complete reimagination, redefinition, repositioning of something so basic, you know, as pizza over these many years that has had to happen as a result of a variety of external and internal influences and trends to keep pizza relevant. Yeah. And I think the analogy is very much the same for the individual, the team, the organization, and that is, don't let tradition and the way you've always been doing it stand in the way of understanding what are the redefinitions and the reconstitution of the ingredients in the recipe, if you will, to keep yourself, your team, your organization, or maybe even the society that you live in relevant and ready for what the world is now throwing at us, by the way, most of which we do not control. So it's really a response in many ways to things that are coming at us. And if you ignore it, you know, pizza would still be the way that it was 1,000 years ago, and it probably would be not only irrelevant, but no longer on the menu, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's funny, is the only thing we can control is the way we respond to it as well. And so that's where change comes in. That's where taking action comes in, where you don't have a choice.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes that, you know, came through as we were putting the book together was, believe in yourself, because if cauliflower can become pizza, you can become anything. And that's kind of my new mantra now in life.
That's hysterical, right? Yeah, the cauliflower crust, right? I don't think I've tried it to this date. People say it's good, but it's no different than the cauliflower gnocchi to me. And I'm like, wow, that's just weird. But
I remain mildly skeptical. I guess.
yeah, exactly. Now, have you tried it?
I haven't. So
Okay, so you need to, especially if you're
right. Well, if I'm going to follow my own advice, I guess I'm going to have to. But
exactly. Oh, well, the purpose of Evolve is to allow leaders to learn, connect, and grow together. And Ian, thank you so much for taking your time today, and really look forward to following you, and love our visitors to tune in and see what you have to say for sure. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Karen.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.